The woman he gave 2 years of his life to never came to the hospital, but the woman he had slowly forgotten sat beside his bed for 3 nights without leaving. It was 11:47 p.m. when the door to Ward 4B opened. Sacred Heart Hospital, Enugu. The ward smelled of antiseptic, stale air, and the particular silence that belongs only to places where people are fighting to remain alive. 3 beds occupied the room. 2 of them had received visitors earlier in the day. A mother who had wept openly, a group of young men who sat rigidly and didn't know what to do with their hands. But by this hour, by nearly midnight, the room had emptied of everyone but the man in the 3rd bed, who was the only one still awake. Tobe Okonkwo had been in that bed for 3 days. In those 3 days, there had been visitors. His colleagues from Okonkwo & Sons Construction came on the first afternoon with a basket of fruits and the uncomfortable silence of people who do not know how to sit beside sickness without feeling personally accused by it. His friend Daike came twice, stayed an hour each time, and spoke too loudly, the way people do when they are using noise to keep fear at a distance. His mother, Mama Chidima, had arrived from Akwa on the 2nd day and sat beside his bed praying in Igbo, under her breath, but fervently, until the duty nurse leaned in and said, very gently, "Mama, the other patients." But Vivian had not come. Not once. Not on day 1, not on day 2, not on day 3. He had asked Daike to call her. She said she's on her way, Daike reported on the first evening. On day 2, she said she'll come tomorrow, she has an event. By day 3, Daike had stopped mentioning her name. And Tobe, lying in that bed with a drip in his left arm, an oxygen monitor on his finger, and a headache that had become as constant as his own heartbeat, had been alone with his thoughts in a way he had not been in 2 years. 2 years in which he had always had somewhere to go, something to look at, someone to call. Now his phone was dead. The charger was at home and he was too weak to ask anyone to bring one. So he lay in the forced stillness that serious illness imposes, and for the first time in 2 years, Tobe Okonkwo had nothing with which to avoid the truth. He was thinking about all of this when the door opened at 11:47 p.m. and he turned his head toward it with a dull assumption that it was a nurse. It was not a nurse. She was wearing a faded yellow blouse and a wrapper tied at her waist, the clothes of a woman who had not planned to leave the house that night, but had been pulled out by something stronger than convenience. She was carrying a food flask in one hand and a small overnight bag in the other, and there was a tightness in her jaw that told Tobe she had been preparing herself for what she was about to see, that she had imagined it on the drive over and told herself she was ready. Then she stepped into the light of the ward. She saw the drip line, the pallor of 3 days without proper sunlight, the way illness stripped 10 years of certainty from his face and left something more honest behind. Her jaw unlocked, her eyes filled. She did not cry. She breathed in once, deeply, and breathed out. Then she crossed the room to him, set the flask quietly on the bedside table, pulled the plastic chair close, sat and took his hand in hers. She did not say, "I came as fast as I could." She did not say, "Why didn't you call me sooner?" She said nothing at all. She simply held his hand in the particular way that a person holds something they have almost lost, carefully, as if testing that it is real, as if afraid to grip too hard in case it dissolves. "Obi," he whispered. His voice was someone else's voice, thin and unused. She did not reply. She just held his hand, and Tobe Okonkwo, a man who had not wept since the day his father was buried 11 years ago, felt something collapse inside him, not from pain, not from the illness, from something far more devastating than either of those things, from recognition. Now, before we go any further, let us go back. because you will not understand what this moment in Word 4b truly meant unless you understand everything that came before it. You need to see the beginning, the beautiful, hopeful beginning when everything was still possible. You need to see the middle, when things went wrong in the quiet way that things go wrong, not with explosions, but with silences, not with arguments, but with small daily withdrawals. And you need to see the choices, the ones he made, the ones she made, the ones neither of them meant to make. Only then will this night make complete sense. And before we go back to the beginning, take a second to subscribe to Echoes of Wisdom by Crystal so you don't miss stories like this when they are released. 10 years back, to a lecture hall at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. Obiageli Naji had absolutely no intention of speaking to the man who borrowed her engineering mathematics textbook without asking. She had stepped out during a lecture break, come back to find her seat holding her bag, her notes on the desk, and her textbook with her name in green ink on the inside cover, gone. She looked around the hall. 3 rows back, a man she had never seen before was bent over her book with a biro, copying something furiously. He had a jaw built for resolving disagreements and the focused expression of someone who had decided that what he was doing was entirely reasonable. "That's my book," she said. He looked up. He had the decency to look briefly caught. Then, "I know. I'll return it after class. I missed last Thursday's lecture." "You could have asked. You weren't here to ask. You could have waited." The lecture was resuming. She stared at him. He stared back with the unbothered steadiness of someone who had decided that stubbornness was a virtue. Then he said, with a calm that she would think about for years afterward, "I'm Tobe. I'll return your book after class and I'll buy you a cold drink to say sorry. That's the best I can offer." She took her seat 2 rows ahead of him and said nothing. But when class ended, he was at the door with her textbook and a cold Fanta from the campus kiosk. And before she could decide not to find this charming, she found it charming. They married 5 years later, not in a big hall with imported decorations and a Lagos-based band, in the compound of her father's house in Newi, with a canopy rented from the next street and jollof rice that the women cooked in the backyard from early morning, and a happiness between them that required nothing it could not afford. The early years were not easy. Tobe's contracting business was a belief system more than a company. 2 workers, a second-hand pickup truck, small residential jobs that barely covered materials. Obi was teaching at a private secondary school in Enugu, her salary the quiet engine that kept them stable, while his belief became something real. She never once called it sacrifice. She cooked with what they had and made it taste like more. She decorated their 2-bedroom flat in Achara layout, the one with the landlord who fixed nothing, and the ceiling fan that turned like a dying man with curtains she sewed herself from fabric remnants. When Chisom was born, their first, a girl with Obi's eyes and Tobe's jaw, Obi went back to teaching 3 months later because they needed the income and there was no discussion to be had about it. When David arrived 2 years after, she managed school, home, 2 children, and a growing small fashion business she ran from the sitting room, stitching orders during David's nap times with the efficiency of someone who understood that time was the one luxury she could not afford to waste. And Tobe built. Year after year, job after job, he built his company until it became something real, and then something impressive, until they could move to GRA, until the children attended proper schools, until Obi could leave teaching and grow her fashion business properly, until they had built, from a borrowed textbook and a cold Fanta, and 14 years of choosing each other, a life that from the outside looks like the reward for everything they had survived. From the outside, it was beautiful. But from the outside has never told the whole story of anything. It didn't happen suddenly. This is the first thing you must understand. There was no single day when Tobe Okonkwo woke up and decided to become the man who came home late, who checked his phone too often, who sat at the dinner table and looked past his wife. It happened the way water shapes stone, slowly, invisibly, one unremarkable day at a time. And like stone shaped by water, neither party was fully watching it happen. The business was doing well, too well, in ways that had their own particular pressure. Bigger contract meant bigger problems. A delayed delivery here, a client dispute there, staff needing managing, banks needing reassuring, subcontractors who required more supervision than their contract suggested. Tobe was carrying more than he had ever carried, and he was carrying it largely alone, because somewhere between Chisholm's junior WAEC preparations and David's new school, his wife had become a person he shared a house with rather than a person he shared his life with. He would come home at 7 in the evening, sometimes 8. Obi would be in the kitchen or helping one of the children with something. "Food is in the pot," she would say, without turning from what she was doing. He would serve himself, eat at the dining table alone, and by the time he was done, the children would have drifted to their rooms and Obi would be on the sofa with her phone, reviewing fabric orders or responding to a customer. If he said something, she answered, but she did not look up. She was not being cruel. She was exhausted, running a home, raising 2 children who had inherited at least half of their father's stubbornness, managing a fashion business with a client list that was growing faster than her hours. She was doing all of it. She was simply so deep inside the management of everything that she had stopped seeing the man at the center. The appreciation had thinned to nothing. When Tobe paid the school fees, which he did every term without being asked, without drama, there was no acknowledgement. It was expected. When he fixed the generator on a Saturday morning instead of resting, or brought home the groceries, or quietly covered a household expense that Obi had forgotten to budget for, these things dissolved into the routine of the house without comment, absorbed the way water is absorbed by dry ground. The children had taken their cue from the atmosphere of the house. One evening, Tobe asked David to take the recycling bags to the gate. David, 9 years old and firmly convinced that the world owed him stillness, groaned and said, "Why is it always me?" Obi from the kitchen doorway said, "David, come and help me first. You'll do it later." Tobe said nothing. He picked up the bags himself and took them out. But the expression on his face when he came back in, that quiet, resigned look of a man who has been overruled in his own home and has decided the argument is not worth having, was the expression of a man accumulating a debt of small humiliations he would one day seek to balance elsewhere. Chisom was 15, and somewhere inside the sealed world of teenage independence, she arrived at her father when she needed money for a school project or permission for something. Beyond that, she moved through the house with her earphones in and her attention on her phone, a tenant more than a daughter. Tobe began to feel gradually and then all at once, like a machine, a well-maintained, regularly relied upon machine, but a machine, something you activate when you need it to work, not something you celebrate when it does. He provided everything. He was the engine of the entire life they all lived, and he was as invisible as engines are, noticed only when something went wrong. He never said any of this. Men like Tobe did not say these things. They filed them away, pressed them down, and looked for air. And then they found somewhere else that had air to offer. Her name was Vivian Eze. She was 29 years old, an event manager based in Enugu, with a smile she deployed like a deliberate instrument, and a talent for making every man she spoke to feel like the most interesting person in the room. She was not evil. Evil is too simple a word for what she was. She was strategic in the way that people become strategic when they have learned that the world rarely gives them what they want freely. They met at a corporate dinner in Abuja, a celebration for a client who had received a government contract. Vivian was managing the event. Tobe was at a table full of businessmen talking about money in the self-congratulatory way that businessmen do, and he had drifted mentally to a site dispute in his company, running numbers in his head, when a voice beside him said, "You look like you'd rather be somewhere else entirely." He looked up. She was standing with a clipboard and an expression that was amused, not professional. "I have a site issue I can't stop thinking about," he said. "At a dinner like this? My head doesn't have office hours." She laughed, not the polished performative laugh of an events professional, an actual laugh. "That must be completely exhausting," she said, and the way she said it, not with pity but with genuine curiosity, as if she was actually interested in what it felt like, made him set down his glass and turn to face her properly for the first time. They spoke for 12 minutes that evening. He did not realize it had been that long until a colleague nudged him. They exchanged numbers. Professionally, he told himself. She was an events manager. He hosted client events. It was a contact. It was not a contact. Or it was until the first time she called, just to ask how the site issue had resolved. The subcontractor came through eventually, he said, and she said, "Good, you deserved a win." 3 words, simple. But in the weeks since he had last heard his wife say anything within distance of that, 3 words felt like a long drink of water to someone who had been thirsty for longer than they knew. The conversations grew longer. Then came lunch, once because they happened to be in the same part of town. Then again because the first had not been enough. And somewhere in the slow movement from lunch to longer evenings to the quiet of her apartment in Independence Layout, the line was crossed. Not dramatically, not in a single moment that could be pointed at and blamed, but unmistakably. Vivian gave Tobe something that had been absent from his life for years. Not only attention, though she gave that in abundance. She gave him the experience of being celebrated. She asked about his projects and waited for the full answer. She said, "You carry so much," with an expression that suggested she actually understood the weight of it. She said, "Your family is fortunate," and looked at him as if fortunate were not a strong enough word. When he achieved something at work, she was the first person he thought to tell because she was the person who responded with the kind of enthusiasm that makes an achievement feel real. He was not entirely blind to what this was. Somewhere beneath it all, he knew that what Vivian offered freely was not offered without a calculation. But he had been starving for something, and she offered food. It is very difficult to walk away from food when you have been starving, even food that is not entirely what it appears to be. The money flowed toward her, steadily, not all at once. He was not reckless. He covered her rent when it came due. She thanked him in a way that struck him every time, because Obi had not thanked him for anything in the same way in years. He bought her things. He extended business trips to remain an extra day wherever she happened to be. He came home and told Obi the delays were client-related. She appeared to believe him. His friend Daike watched all of this with the expression of a man who can see a vehicle approaching a wall and cannot find the brakes. One evening over a beer in New Haven, Daike said, "Tobe, be careful. What you are doing will end badly." "You don't understand what I have with her." "Then explain it to me." "She sees me, Daike. She actually looks at me and sees me." Daike was quiet for a moment. Then, "Every woman to whom you give time and money and attention will look at you and reflect back what you want to see. That is not being seen, Daike. That is a mirror performing love. Your wife built a house with you from nothing. She sat with you when nothing was certain. You want to risk all of that for someone who only entered your story after it was already written?" Tobe picked up his bottle and changed the subject. But Daike's words took up residence in a part of his mind he worked very hard not to visit. It was an ordinary Thursday, the kind of day that gives nothing away. Obi had spent the afternoon completing a delivery of 4 Ankara dresses, responding to messages from 3 new customers, and reminding David twice to finish his homework before dinner. She was at the kitchen sink rinsing tomatoes when Tobe came in at 6:30, earlier than usual, and said he was going to shower before eating. He set his phone on the kitchen counter, face up, and walked out. She did not intend to look at it. She was not that kind of woman. She held this as a genuine truth about herself. But the phone buzzed while she was reaching across the counter for the strainer, and the notification lit the screen before she could choose not to see it. "Miss you already. V.E." She stood there with her wet hands and the strainer, and the notification fading on the screen. Then she set the strainer down and picked up the phone. She told herself she would only read that one message. The thread was open from the last time he had read it. She did not read everything. She read enough. She put the phone back exactly where it had been, same angle, face up, the same small scratch on the corner facing left, and stood at the sink with the water running cold over her hands for 30 seconds. Then she finished making dinner. She served it. She called the children. She sat across from her husband and ate. She smiled when she said something that deserved a smile. She cleared the plates and washed up while Tobe watched the news in the sitting room. Then she told him she had a headache and was going to bed early.
She lay in the dark for 2 hours before she could name what she was feeling. It was grief. Not the immediate, noisy grief of a confrontation or a public discovery. The quiet, settling kind that arrives when you realize that the shape of your life is not what you believed it was, that the ground beneath you has been hollow in places you were not watching. The next morning, she called Ngozi. Ngozi, I need to talk.
Ngozi was at her door within the hour. That is the speed of her best friend of 14 years. She arrives without waiting for the full story. Obi told her everything, flat, factual, in the voice of someone who had run on 4 hours of sleep and spent them thinking. Ngozi's face went through 6 expressions in 30 seconds. Tell me where he is right now and I will, Ngozi. Obi, after everything you have done, after you held that business together while carrying David on your back, after you, Ngozi, give me his phone. I want to call this woman myself and tell her exactly I am not going to do any of that, Obi said. Ngozi stopped mid-sentence. What? She said. I am not going to confront him. I'm not going to expose him to anyone. I'm not going to pack anything. Obi looked at her hands. And I am not going to leave my house. Obi, are you hearing yourself right now? This is my house, Obi said. There was something in her voice. Not coldness, not weakness, but a settled clarity that made Ngozi go still and actually listen. These are my children. I built this life. I will not be driven out of it by someone who entered it through a back door. She looked up. But Ngozi, I also know something that is harder to say. What? I have not been the wife I was supposed to be. Not in the way that drives a man away by force. What he is doing is his own sin and his own choice. But I have been allowing things to grow cold. I have been so busy managing this house, managing these children, managing my business that I forgot to manage the most important thing. She paused. I forgot to see him. The room was very quiet. Ngozi said softly, So what are you going to do? I am going to pray, Obi said, and I am going to change what needs to change in me, not for him, for the sake of what is right and for the sake of who I want to be as a woman. And if he doesn't change, Ngozi asked. Obi picked up her cup of tea. It had gone cold. She drank it anyway. Then I will have to make a different decision, but not before I've done my part. She began at 4 in the morning. The house was in its deepest quiet, that truthful stillness that settles after midnight before the birds remember themselves and before the world picks up its noise. Obi would rise from bed without waking Tobe, wrap herself in a shawl, and go to the corner of the sitting room she had always called her space, a chair beside the window that faced the small garden Tobe had planted for her in the first year of their GRA house. She would kneel on the bare floor, and she would pray the way she had always prayed, not in the polished language of public worship, but in her own voice, which was sometimes composed and sometimes completely undone. God, she said on the first morning, I am angry. I want you to know that first before I say anything else. I am angry and I am hurt, and there is a part of me that wants to walk out of this house and make him feel the full weight of what he has done to me. She breathed. But I also know that I have my own silence to account for, my own distance. I have been managing this house like a project instead of a home. I have been loving these children while forgetting that their father is here too, and that he is human, and that he has needs I stopped meeting without noticing that I had stopped. She pressed her forehead to her clasped hands. I am not saying what he is doing is right. It is not right, but God, show me my part in this. Show me what I have allowed to happen so that when this storm passes, and it will pass, I am a better woman than I was when it began. That was the prayer that changed everything. Not the prayer for Tobe to return, not the prayer for Vivian to disappear, the prayer for her own clarity. And clarity in the weeks that followed came. Not comfortably. Clarity rarely comes comfortably. It came in memories that arrived like quiet accusations in the pre-dawn dark.
She remembered the evening Tobe returned from 3 weeks on a difficult site in Nui, barely slept, having personally absorbed a financial loss to fix a problem that was not entirely his fault. And she had met him at the door with a complaint about the water bill and a question about when he could look at the washing machine, which had been making a noise. She had not said welcome home. She had not asked how the 3 weeks had been. She remembered his birthday the previous year. She had been deep in preparing for a large client order and had handed him a card in the morning and said dinner would have to be simple because she had work. He had said it's fine in the flat tone of someone who has stopped expecting and has decided that not expecting is less painful. She had not heard it. She had been too busy. She remembered the Sunday he suggested taking the children to the park for the afternoon. David said he didn't want to go. Instead of saying, "Your father planned this, we are going," Obi had looked at Tobe and said, "Another time, maybe." She had misread the look on his face as relief. It was not relief. It was the look of a man quietly adding another item to a list he was keeping in a place he never spoke about. She remembered how Chisom said, "Daddy," only when she needed something. How David accepted everything his father provided without comment. How the household ran on Tobe's money, his effort, his labor, and how none of that was ever named, not once, as if acknowledgement would somehow diminish the natural order of things. Obi knelt in the dark of her sitting room and looked at each of these memories without flinching, and they cost her something. Because she was not a bad woman. She had never intended any of it, but she had been a distracted woman, a woman who had, slowly and without malice, allowed the man beside her to become furniture, relied upon, necessary, never truly seen. She made changes, deliberately, quietly, without announcement. She began to greet him. Every evening when she heard his key in the lock, she went to the door, not with a list of what had gone wrong in the house that day, just welcome home. Sometimes she brought him water, sometimes she sat beside him before dinner and asked about his day, and when he gave a surface answer, she waited for the real one. Some evenings she rubbed his shoulders for a few minutes without being asked, without making it a transaction. She talked to the children, not in lectures. Obi understood her children well enough to know that formal lectures are fertilizer for teenage resistance. She did it in conversation, over food. Your father leaves this house before you are awake and returns after you have eaten. Do you actually know what he is doing all of that time? She watched Chisom's face, something moving behind the teenager's eyes that looked like the very first breath of comprehension. Next time he walks through that door, Obi said, before he even sits down, say thank you for something, anything real. Try it. She watched the temperature of the house shift by small degrees. She did not tell Tobe she was changing. She simply changed. She let the changes speak for themselves. And Tobe noticed. He came home one evening to a warm greeting and a dinner that was not just made, but presented, the table set, the children having eaten earlier so that he could have quiet. He stood in the entrance hall with a confused expression, as if he had walked through the wrong door and was waiting for the house to correct itself. He noticed that when David gave a half-hearted response to something he said, it was Chisom who turned to her brother and said, "David, answer Daddy properly." He noticed that his birthday, a Wednesday in March that had passed largely unobserved for 2 years, was this year marked with his favorite food, cooked from scratch, and a cake that the children had decorated with icing that spelled his name incorrectly but with great sincerity. He noticed all of it, but he did not change. Because by March, he was too deep with Vivian, and perhaps, if he is being honest, the honest version of himself that only the hospital would eventually produce, because he was not yet ready to confront what he had become. Vivian Eze was not a woman built for staying. She would not have put it this way. She had a more flattering narrative for herself, something about protecting her peace, refusing to settle, knowing her worth. But the simpler truth, the one that required no flattering narrative, was this. Vivian was excellent at beginnings, at the sparkling, effortless, electric part of a connection, the part that requires no history, no sacrifice, no willingness to stay when it becomes difficult. She was significantly less interested in what came after. By the time Tobe had been in her life for 2 years, the returns were diminishing in ways that Vivian was too self-aware to ignore. The excitement of the secret became the routine of the secret. His calls arrived more often with edges of stress and the particular exhaustion of a man who was living a double life and was beginning to feel the weight of it. He was still useful, she was clear-eyed about this word, and applied it without guilt. But useful has a shelf life, especially when something that requires no maintenance presents itself. His name was Soji Adeyemi, Abuja-based, real estate, 34, no children, no complications. The kind of man who could fly her to Lagos for a weekend without explaining anything to anyone.
Vivian had not yet made a decision. She was keeping her architecture standing while building a different one. Her friend Temi, over cocktails at a hotel bar, asked her directly, "Where is all this going with Tobe?" Vivian swelled her glass. "Nowhere, if I'm honest. He is a family man. He'll never truly leave." "Then what exactly is the point?" "The point is that he covers things, and I give him what his wife stopped giving him." She shrugged. "It works for both of us." Until... Vivian's phone lit up, a message from Soji. She looked at it and smiled. "Until it doesn't," she said. She did not know, sitting in that hotel bar, in that white dress, with that drink in her hand, that Tobe Okonkwo had less than 3 weeks before he would collapse on a construction site and spend 3 days in a hospital bed. And when she found out, the truth, the one she did not say aloud, was that it changed nothing about what she had already decided. It was a Tuesday in March when the site foreman at the Tobe construction site called Daike Anene in a voice stripped of its ordinary confidence. "Something happened to Oga Tobe. The ambulance is coming. You should come now." What happened is this. Tobe had been on site since 7 in the morning, managing a crisis that had been building for 2 weeks. A subcontractor had failed to deliver steel reinforcement on schedule, threatening a contract that could not be extended again. Tobe had been on the phone, walking the site perimeter in full afternoon heat, already past the lunch he had skipped, in the middle of a call that had been escalating for 20 minutes, when the world tilted sideways. The doctors would call it a hypertensive crisis, a blood pressure event brought on by sustained stress, sleep deprivation, and a body that had been issuing warnings for 6 weeks that its owner had been too busy or too distracted to hear. The headaches had been there for 6 weeks. The chest tightness had come and gone. He had dismissed both as the symptoms of a full life. He did not stop until his body stopped for him. He dropped his phone mid-sentence. His right hand went numb from the elbow. The world tilted and then the ground came up and he was on his back on the laterite earth of the construction site, surrounded by his own workers shouting his name. He could hear them perfectly. He could not answer. And that, the experience of being surrounded by people calling your name and being unable to respond, was the most frightening thing Tobe Okonkwo had ever lived through. Sacred Heart Hospital, Ward 4B. Daike arrived first, signed the admission papers, and then walked outside and called Obi. The call lasted 40 seconds. Obi asked 2 questions: what happened and which hospital. She said she was on her way. As Daike was putting his phone back in his pocket, he paused. He scrolled to Tobe's number and typed a text. Tobe collapsed at his site. Sacred Heart Hospital. Thought you should know. He didn't fully understand why he sent it. Perhaps some part of him wanted to see what she would do when there was nothing to gain from showing up. 3 hours later, Vivian replied, "Oh God, that's terrible. Please keep me updated. I'll try to come tomorrow." Tomorrow came. Vivian did not. Obi was already there. Obi had been there since the previous evening, in the plastic chair beside his bed, her back aching and her eyes dark from no sleep, talking to doctors in the particular tone of a woman who will not be giving vague answers, signing every form that needed signing, calling Tobe's mother with the steady voice of someone who has decided that panic is a luxury she cannot afford. In the hospital, Obi was a different version of herself than the one who managed the chaos of the GRA house. She was quieter, more focused. She moved through the ward with a calm that the nurses noticed, and that Dike, watching her, found quietly humbling. She memorized the doctor's rounds.
She learned which nurse was efficient and which required tracking down. She brought food in the flask every evening, not the light, safe, invalid food she thought she was supposed to bring, but his food, the food he actually liked, because she had decided that if he was going to recover, he would recover with his full strength. She called his mother every evening at 8. "Mama, he had a good day today. He sat up by himself this afternoon. He's getting stronger." She said these things with a steadiness she had to actively maintain because Mama Chidima was 71 and alone in Alka, and the steadiness was something Obi owed her. On the second night, Tobe was in that half-conscious space that serious illness sometimes creates, aware of the room without being fully present in it. Obi believed he was sleeping. She drew her chair close and she prayed over him the way she prayed when she was alone, in a low voice without performance. "God," she said, "bring him back. Not to prove me right, not to win anything. Bring him back for his children, who need their father to be present for all the years ahead. Bring him back for himself, because he is more than this moment. He is more than any mistake he has made." She paused, and her voice dropped further. "And let there be change, in him, in me, in all of us. But bring him back first. Please, bring him home." Tobe heard this. He heard it with the particular, unavoidable clarity that comes when illness strips your defenses down to nothing. You cannot be proud in a hospital bed. You cannot manage or perform or redirect. You can only receive what is happening with no filter between you and it. He heard his wife pray for him as if the anger, which she had every right to carry, was not the first thing in the room. He heard her call him more than his mistakes. He opened his eyes. Obi was still praying, head bent, voice just above a breath. Then she looked up and found him watching her. She exhaled, a long, unsteady breath of relief she had apparently been holding for 3 days. "You are awake," she said. He tried to speak. She put her hand on his arm. "Don't. You don't have to say anything. Rest. I'm here." He closed his eyes again. But something had shifted in him that could not be put back. On the third day, Dike sat with Obi in the waiting area outside the ward. He was quiet for a while. Then, "Obi, there is something I need to tell you. When he was first admitted, I sent a message to a woman named Vivian. I told her what happened and which hospital. She said she would come." He kept his eyes on the wall. "She hasn't come, not once in 3 days." Obi was silent. "You know who Vivian is?" he said. "I know who Vivian is," Obi said. Dike turned to look at her. "You knew?" "Yes." "For how long?" 8 months. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he looked away because meeting her eyes felt like standing in something he wasn't sure he had earned a place in. "Obi," he said, finally, in a voice that carried something close to shame. "I am sorry. I knew, and I didn't. Don't be sorry. Just pray for him." They sat together in that particular silence of two people who love the same person and are both in their different ways counting the cost of it. "She hasn't come once," Dike said, not to inform Obi because the fact kept requiring to be spoken aloud. "I know," said Obi. In the second week of Tobe's hospitalization, Vivian Eze posted a photograph on Instagram. She was at a rooftop restaurant in Abuja, in a white dress, her head thrown back in laughter. Beside her, his arm comfortable across the back of her chair, was Soji Adeyemi. The caption read, "Some weekends are made for this." Nearly 2,000 likes by the time Dike saw it on a Sunday morning in Tobe's ward. 2 days after the photo went up, Tobe's restored phone received a final message from Vivian's number. "I hear you're getting better. That's really good. Take care of yourself." Then nothing. The number, when Dike tried it the following day, rang once and went to a full voicemail. She had moved on, completely, without ceremony or explanation, like closing a tab. When Tobe was conscious enough to ask about her directly, Dike showed him the Instagram post. He showed him the final message. He told him the number was no longer reachable. Tobe looked at the photograph for a very long time. White dress, rooftop, another man's arm across the back of her chair, her laughter aimed at something he could not see. Then he handed the phone back to DK and looked at the ceiling. He was silent for almost 2 minutes. When he spoke, his voice had the terrible, absolute evenness of someone who has absorbed a truth that requires no more examination. 2 years, he said. 2 years I paid her rent. I moved a client dinner for her birthday. I sat in a hospital bed for 3 days and she sent 3 sentences. DK said nothing. She never loved me, Tobe said. It was not a question. She loved what you could do for her, DK said quietly. That is a different thing entirely. And Obi has been here every day, every night. The silence in Ward 4B was very loud. 2 days before discharge, the ward was quiet in the early evening. The other patient had been transferred. The nurses had completed their rounds. Tobe and Obi were alone in the room for the first time. He had been building towards something all day. Obi could feel it in the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, the way a person looks when they are rehearsing something they don't yet know how to say. Obi, he said. She set down her phone. Let me talk, please don't stop me. She folded her hands in her lap. I'm listening. He told her everything. He did not minimize. He did not use the soft, evasive language that men sometimes use to describe betrayals. He did not say there was someone else, in the vague way that suggests the someone was barely there. He said her name. He said 2 years. He said, I paid her rent. I bought her things. I told you I was somewhere I was not. He said all of this looking at his hands, because looking at his wife's face while he said it was more than he could do. When he finished, the room was so quiet that the IV stand sounded loud. Obi was still for a long moment. Then she said, I know. He raised his head. What? I found out 8 months ago. I saw a message on your phone in the kitchen. He stared at her. Something drained from his face. You have known for 8 months? Yes. And you said nothing? No. Obi, his voice broke on the word, not from weakness, but from the force of not understanding. Why? Why would you know for 8 months and say nothing and continue? Why would you stay? She looked at him directly for the first time since the conversation began. Because I was angry first. Then I was sad. Then I did something harder than both of those things. What did you do? I was honest with myself. She kept her voice steady. Tobe, when I looked at our home, I did not only see what you had done. I saw what I had failed to do. I looked at our house and I asked myself, when last did I greet this man when he walked through that door? When last did I look at what he carries every single day and say thank you? When last did our children treat their father like a person instead of a service? Tobe's jaw tightened. He looked away. I am not saying, her voice was firm, that what you did was caused by me. It was not. You made a decision that no difficulty at home can excuse, and that is yours to carry. But I am saying that I examined myself, and I saw a woman who had become so absorbed in the business of living that she had stopped tending the life. She paused. I complained. I accepted everything you provided as expectation. I sided with David when you were trying to be his father. I made this house a place where you are needed but never celebrated. And someone noticed that you were thirsty, and she offered you water, and you drank. Tobe, I'm not finished. She took a breath. She didn't come. In 3 weeks, while you were in this bed, the woman you gave 2 years of your life to sent you 11 words and moved on to another man. She said this without venom, without triumph, with the flat, clear tone of someone simply reading a fact aloud. That is what that was. That is what you almost destroyed your family for. And Tobe Okonkwo put his face in his hands and wept. Not the careful, performed kind of crying that a person does when they want to be seen crying. The uncontrolled, ungovernable kind that arrives when pride and grief and regret and exhaustion all converge at the same moment, and there is no longer any wall strong enough to hold them back. Obi watched him for a moment. Then she rose from her chair, sat on the edge of his bed, and put her arms around him, the way she had not done in longer than either of them could clearly remember. The way she used to in the flat in Achara layout, when the ceiling fan barely turned and they had nothing but each other, and it had been enough. She did not say it was okay. It was not okay, and she would not lie about it. She did not say, "I forgive you." That would come later, in private, over time, in the difficult, non-linear way that real forgiveness moves. She said nothing. She held him. The way you hold someone who has gone very far down the wrong road and has finally found their way back. After a long while, she spoke into his shoulder. "When we go home, we start again, both of us. Not because what happened didn't happen, but because this family is worth the work of starting again. I have things to change, you have things to change, and our children have things to learn." She pulled back and looked at him. "But I need you to be present, truly here. Not half here and half somewhere else. Here." He looked at his wife's face in the light of the hospital room. The tiredness in it, the grace in it, the strength of a woman who had held everything together while holding herself together too, for 8 months, without anyone knowing. "I'm here," he said. "I promise you, I am here." They discharged him on a Friday morning. The children were waiting at the house. Chisom had cleaned the sitting room with a thoroughness that suggested she had put real thought into what cleaning meant. David had arranged flowers from the garden in a plastic cup and placed them on the center table with the gravity of someone performing a significant ceremony. When Tobe stepped out of the car and into the compound, David came first. He ran without hesitation and Tobe caught him, pulling the boy against his chest. David, who had been told by his sister not to cry because Daddy needs us to be strong, cried immediately. "I'm sorry I always complained, Daddy. I'm sorry, Daddy. Every time you asked me to do something and I said, why is it always me? I'm sorry." Tobe held him tighter. "I'm sorry too," he said, and he meant it in ways that David was too young to fully understand yet. "I should have told you that every little thing you do in this house matters, that I see you, that I am proud of you." Chisom was hanging back, trying to hold herself together. When Tobe looked across the compound, something in her face gave way, and she crossed the distance and held on. "I cooked," she said when she could speak. "Ofe onugbu. I watched videos for 2 days. It might be too salty." He laughed, the first full laugh since before the hospital. "It will not be terrible." It was a little salty. He ate 3 full servings and told her it was the best he had eaten in weeks. She knew he was being generous. She also knew that generosity of this kind was itself a gift. In the weeks that followed, the house changed. Not in the dramatic, all-at-once way of stories that resolve too cleanly, in the way that real change moves, slowly, imperfectly, with moments of backsliding and recommitment, with conversations that started well and ended badly and had to be resumed the following day. Obi held to what she had started. Tobe left his work at work with a discipline he had never previously applied to that boundary. He came home earlier. He sat at the dinner table and asked real questions and waited for real answers. He closed the chapter with Vivian's world permanently and completely, without drama, because there was no drama left in it. That story had ended in 11 words and a blocked number. There was nothing left to address. He began to go to church, not because Obi asked, because he needed to, because some accounting needed to happen between himself and God, and he needed the specific weight of a sanctuary to hold it. And Obi, in the quiet of her 4 a.m. prayers, began to add gratitude to what had previously been only petition. She thanked God for the hospital. She thanked God for the enforced stillness that had cracked her husband open, because people moving too fast rarely stop to examine the direction they are moving in. She thanked God, in a prayer that cost her something real, for the clarity that the whole terrible experience had given her about herself. She did not thank God for the betrayal. She was not advanced, but she thanked God that they had survived it. 6 months later. The children are in their rooms, Chisom with her books, David with his football, both occupied with the ordinary, irreplaceable business of growing up in a home that has, without anyone making a formal announcement, become warmer than it used to be. Not perfect. Real families are not perfect, but warmer, more deliberate, more honest. Tobe comes downstairs and stops when he sees the dining table. A tablecloth, a single candle, his favorite meal, jollof rice with fried plantain and grilled chicken, the meal he told Obi in a restaurant in Nsukka 14 years ago was his idea of the perfect dinner. The playlist they used to listen to on Sunday mornings when they were newly married and poor, and the morning light through those cheap curtains was the most beautiful thing in the world. "What is this?" he says. "Anniversary dinner," Obi says. "Our anniversary is in February." 6 months since you came home from the hospital, she says. "That counts." He stands there for a moment. Then he pulls out her chair. She sits. He sits across from her, and they eat together in the unhurried, easy way of two people who have been through fire and come out the other side of it changed. Not unmarked, not without scars, but changed in ways that have made them more genuinely themselves than they were before. Later, when the plates are cleared and they are sitting with their drinks in the quiet of the evening, Tobe looks across at his wife. He thinks about Ward 4B, about the door opening at 11:47 at night, about a faded yellow blouse and a food flask and a hand that took his without asking whether he deserved to have it taken. He thinks, "I gave 2 years of my life to a woman who sent me 11 words when I was lying in a hospital bed, and I came within a breath of losing the woman who drove across the city in the middle of the night and held my hand without making me earn it first." "Obi," he says. "Thank you." She looks up. "For what?" "For staying when you had every reason not to." She is quiet for a moment. The candle moves between them. Then, "I didn't stay for a reason," she says. "I stayed because I made a promise 14 years ago, and because I believed, even in the worst of it, that the man I made that promise with was still in there somewhere." "And if he hadn't been?" he asked, honestly. She considers it. "Then I would eventually have had to let him go, but not before I knew for certain. Not before I had done my own part." She looks at him across the table. "We nearly lost each other, Tobe. Not only because of what you did, because of what we both stopped doing. I will not stop again." "Neither will I," he says. And there in the candlelight of their own dining room, with the sound of a sleeping house around them and a playlist from 14 years ago playing softly in the background, Tobechukwu and Obiageli Okonkwo begin again. Not perfectly, not without the memory of what they went through, but together, which, as anyone who has been through the fire will tell you, is the only place that has ever truly mattered. The question is never who will stay when everything is good, when the money flows and the laughter comes easily and success is in the air like a perfume you never want to leave. Everyone stays. Everyone shows up when there is something to gain from showing up. The performance is easy when the stage is bright. The real question, the one that strips everything back to its bones, is who will stay when the going becomes tough? When the lights of the hospital ward are harsh and the night is long and you have nothing left to offer but your presence. When there is nothing glamorous about it, nothing to be gained from being there, nothing to photograph or celebrate. When you are not impressive, not strong, not the version of yourself that anyone would choose to admire. When you are simply stripped of everything else, human. That is when you find out what you actually have. Tobe found out in 3 days in Ward 4B with absolute unavoidable clarity who had loved him and who had loved the usefulness of him. And that difference between being loved and being used is one of the most important distinctions a human being can learn. He learnt it the hard way, as most people who truly learn it do. But he also found out something about himself, that he had been feeding on the easy performance of being appreciated, while allowing the woman who had built something real with him to grow invisible to his gratitude. That appreciation given by someone with no history with you, no investment in you, no willingness to stay when it is difficult, that is not the same as being truly known. It feels the same in the beginning. It is not the same thing. And Obi found out something too, that love is not a passive thing, that a home does not stay warm on its own, it must be tended deliberately, consistently, the way a fire must be tended. And if you become too occupied with everything else to feed it, it will grow cold without you noticing. And someone will eventually come with kindling, not because they are better, because in the moment that mattered, they were present and you are not. She found out what she was made of, that she could carry a wound in silence for 8 months and choose prayer over destruction, that she could look honestly at her own failures while managing someone else's crisis, that she was stronger than any version of herself she had previously required herself to be. They both were. So, is this story a defense of betrayal? No. What Tobe did was wrong, and he will carry the knowledge of it for as long as he lives. Is it a demand that every person stay in every situation? No. Obi stayed because she believed, after honest examination, that there was something real to return to, and she was right. Every person must make that discernment for themselves. There are situations from which staying is not wisdom, but surrender. Only you can know which one you are in. But it is an invitation to look at what we are building at home. Are we building a place where the people who chose us feel genuinely seen, not just needed, not just provided for, but seen? Are we tending the fire? Or are we assuming that because it burned yesterday, it will burn tomorrow without us? And for those who are outside someone's home, offering what they are not building, what do you actually have? Appreciation given at no cost, with no history, with nothing at stake, is not love. It is a mirror held at a flattering angle, and mirrors do not stay when the light changes. Vivian had her final moment. She sent 11 words and moved on. She posted photographs in a white dress and moved into another chapter without looking back. Obi was at the door of Ward 4B at 11:47 at night in her house clothes with tired eyes and a food flask. Ask yourself which of these two you are in someone else's story. And ask yourself which of these two you are building your life to deserve. Because in that quiet hospital room, Tobe finally understood something many people never learn in their entire lives. When life is beautiful, everyone stays. But when life becomes difficult, only the one who truly loves you remains. If this story reached something in you, you already know someone who needs to hear it. Share it with them right now. Don't scroll past. And if you are new here, welcome to Echoes of Wisdom. Every story on this channel is built to make you feel, think, and grow. Subscribe so you never miss one. The next story is already coming. Drop a comment below. Did Obi do the right thing by staying, or would you have walked? Let the conversation begin. And if this story moved you, give it a like. It tells us to keep going. It tells us this work matters. See you in the next one.